So I've been enjoying the hell out of Tears of the Kingdom, the latest Legend of Zelda game that, given its sales, you've probably been playing yourself. I've wanted to make a video on Breath of the Wild to coincide with this release, even playing it for the first time, only for that video to fall apart. Long story short, I couldn't find any words to say about it that didn't feel like I was repeating every other video about this game. I still want to cover it at some point, but I doubt it'll happen anytime soon. But I still wanted to talk about a Zelda game in honor of Tears of the Kingdom, and I managed to do it just in time for the game's launch. Okay, I'm bad at scheduling things, sue me. Anyway, when it came to choosing a Zelda game to talk about, that was kind of a challenge. You might be surprised to learn that other than Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and now Breath of the Wild, my Zelda experience is pretty limited. A few years ago, I played through A Link to the Past on stream for the first time and really enjoyed it, and it got me curious about the other 2D Zelda games. The only other one I had any experience with was Zelda 2, which was, strangely enough, my first Zelda game. I played it as a kid and never came close to beating it. But naturally, my enjoyment of Link to the Past led me to its direct follow-up, Link's Awakening. Despite being a handheld title, it had just as much care and attention as that SNES classic despite the limits of the Game Boy. It's been a beloved entry in the series since it launched, even receiving a complete remake on Switch in 2019. So does the first handheld Zelda game still hold a candle all these years later? Let's find out. As you can see, I'm playing the Game Boy Color Enhanced Edition Link's Awakening DX, specifically via Nintendo Switch Online. This version adds a whole new dungeon and some optional side content, and also fixes some bugs present in the original Game Boy version. Keep in mind that this is the only version I've played. I haven't touched the Switch remake. If you're wondering why I didn't play that version instead, the answer is simple. I don't own it as of making this video. Once I started playing the DX version though, I was relieved that the game didn't feel very cramped. Link doesn't take up so much of the screen that you don't have enough room to work with, and most enemies aren't that big either. The enemies and environments scale pretty well with Link's sprite, which is great as it ensures that moving around the map isn't too exhausting. Koholint Island isn't as large as other settings in the series, but it is varied enough in design and location to make it feel like a fully realized place. I sometimes found it difficult to remember how to get from area to area, but there's a few convenient warp points to reduce your traveling time and enough landmarks to give you a solid overview of where you are and where you need to go. And although the map on its own is only sort of useful, pressing A to get some information on a specific screen is a godsend. Moving Link around is pretty nice. He moves fairly quickly, and bringing back the diagonal movement and sword slash pattern from Link to the Past was a great touch. I've heard many describe the core gameplay as Link to the Past in 8-bit, and that's a very apt description. Just about everything you can do in that game, you can do here. The pacing is really nice, not just on a story point level, although that is true, but in the moment-to-moment gameplay as well. While it took me about 15 hours to beat this game, which is quite a while for a handheld game from this era, it doesn't feel nearly as long thanks to the speed of the action. That, and the game is constantly switching things up. Thanks to the fixed perspective, it can sometimes be hard to make the dungeons and tasks feel really unique. Thankfully, the dungeons at least feel varied thanks to the different color palettes on the DX version, although later dungeons do get on my nerves with how confusing they are. More on that later. Given that this is the fourth major Zelda game, I imagine Nintendo wanted to experiment and try new things. You have a pretty versatile item pool to play with, and compared to the previous 3 games, this is far more customizable. Again, I'm used to Ocarina of Time and the C buttons giving you 3 additional items to work with, so for a handheld game released 5 years prior, I was amazed by how flexible the inventory system is. Both the A and B button can receive whatever item you want, and that level of freedom is quite nice. Even the sword and shield are de-equipable, and although that's unusual for the Zelda series, I actually really like that. With only 2 buttons to work with, making the sword and shield regular items makes you think about what items to switch out in challenging situations. You'll have the sword equipped for 75% of the game anyway, but I appreciate how the game makes you adapt to circumstances where a sword isn't necessary. Consequently, many context-sensitive maneuvers required you to open up the menu screen. It is pretty annoying to open up the menu to equip the bracelet just to lift one rock or pot and then take it off to do something else. I don't mind it for most of these items, but the bracelet in particular just seems like something that Link would always wear. I mean, he apparently walks around wearing flippers all the time and does absolutely fine, so why not a little bracelet? I can understand having to equip the hookshot and the Pegasus boots and all that, but assigning the bracelet to an equipable item slot does bother me. Despite that though, I really enjoyed the items you have to play with. The Rock's Feather that lets you jump across small gaps, the returning hookshot to get across large gaps, the ocarina for playing songs. It's a pretty good inventory all things considered. While certainly not the largest, most of the items have a definite use in battle instead of just solving puzzles or dealing with bosses. The Rock's Feather, for instance, is great for dodging enemies or getting enemies that fly, so you can combine it with the sword or a ranged weapon to take down enemies easily. Not every item felt that useful to me though. Let's take the bow for instance, which is required to beat the game, but I don't find it that great in combat. Maybe it's the small screens, meaning the enemies never get that far away from you, but I just preferred walking up to them and slashing them. It doesn't use ammo and is only marginally slower. Plus, you've got other ranged weapons to pick up the slack. I already mentioned the hookshot, a very solid ranged weapon, although it can't hurt everything. And if you've played this game before, you know about the awesome power of the boomerang. It takes a long time to get it, but man, it is absolutely worth it because it can annihilate just about everything. Makes the bow look like a chump by comparison, especially when you need to pay 980 rupees to get this thing, which is frankly highway robbery. And I know what you're about to say, but Cloud, you can just steal the bow and not pay anything for it. Well, first of all, I don't know who you think I am, but I'm a good little boy. And second of all, it actually isn't that big of a deal because it's pretty easy to get your rupee count up. If you explore the overworld and dungeons enough, you can find plenty of chests containing rupees, and just by fighting enemies and cutting down grass that's in the way, you can make up for the rest of the difference. So yes, the bow is far from a bargain, but saving up for it doesn't take that long. I never needed to grind for it, and I really wasn't using rupees elsewhere. With the bow and the rest of your items, it makes Link's Awakening pretty easy overall. At least in terms of combat and hazards, it's very manageable. Certainly a little difficult when you're just getting started, but once you start getting powerful weapons and more health, you can clear through the game no problem. I went for 100% completion for this video, with a guide, so that significantly powered me up, but even without all the upgrades, it's not very hard at all. The biggest challenge is figuring out what to do next. The game does tell you where to go, with the end of dungeon hints and the owl giving you solid direction, but as for the actual puzzles that open the way forward, I don't know if the game adequately prepares you for it. Some things are easy enough to figure out, but by the end, I felt like the game kept setting up the rug to pull it out from under me. That's especially true for the dungeons, which start out pretty simple, but in the latter half of the game, they get pretty insane. Maybe it's just me, but the layouts of these places feel complex to a fault, with too many twists and turns along the way. You spawn back at the beginning of each dungeon if you die, which can set you back quite a way, especially in the more linear dungeons if you lose your health far into it. Sure, you can warp back to the mid-boss room once you've beaten them, but this isn't always super helpful depending on where you need to go next. The dungeon maps help a little bit, but if you don't memorize the layout of the rooms, and specifically which ones have staircases and one-way doors that lead around the map, you might struggle to get through these places. There's plenty of hidden passageways that add to the confusion, and most of them send you into a side-scrolling section that, I'll be honest, doesn't really work with the traditional Zelda style, even if it is unique. It really started getting frustrating with Catfish's Maw for me, as navigating the water was annoying and it's significantly more open than the dungeons that came before it. Face Shrine also really irritated me. Annoying block puzzles, a very confusing layout, infuriating enemies that prevent you from moving on, and far too much walking back and forth between different parts of the dungeon. Now, I didn't enjoy Eagle Tower either, but partially this was my fault. I didn't realize the objective was to destroy the 4 pillars until I was exploring the dungeon for about 30 minutes, and even then, it probably took me just as long to figure out how to get the wrecking ball to each one. The multiple floors and connecting pathways are just too tricky for me to really remember, and I'm sure some of you out there beat this dungeon when you were young with no outside help, and you know what? Good for you, you should be very proud. I know Turtle Rock is a common sticking point as well for its challenge, and it is a head-scratcher, make no mistake, but I think its placement as the final dungeon before the endgame gives it a more appropriate difficulty. But in contrast to how annoying the dungeons are, most of these bosses are a complete joke. Sure, Face Shrine is a hard dungeon to traverse, but the boss Facade is extremely easy. The anglerfish here was a complete pushover. I was shocked by how quickly this one went down. And then there's the final form of the final boss, Deathel, who goes down in one hit with the boomerang. Way to go, Shadow Man. It does make sense that the dungeons are typically much more challenging than the bosses themselves, because you couldn't do boss fights on the Game Boy that were more intricate than they were in Link to the Past. And in all honesty, I'd prefer to be well-equipped and steamrolling bosses than ill-equipped and getting steamrolled myself, so I guess it all checks out. Anyway, let's wrap things up by talking about the game's story. This is the first Zelda game to mostly ignore the series conventions. You're still Link, but there's no Zelda, no Hyrule, and technically no Ganon either. Link's woken up on the mysterious Koholint Island and needs to free the windfish in order to escape, battling the nightmare creatures along the way. And no, not that nightmare creatures. And then, spoiler alert, it's revealed that Koholint Island and its inhabitants are all a dream of the windfish, and by waking it up, everything will vanish. That's pretty deep for a Zelda story, and yeah, it's intriguing, but honestly, I don't think the game really cares much about the implications of this story. This is one of the sillier and comedic games I've played in the series, never really taking itself too seriously. There's plenty of little bits of humor sprinkled throughout, and for the most part, I think it works. Take the photos, for instance, a DX exclusive feature. Occasionally, you can meet up with a mouse photographer by traveling to certain screens, and I found quite a bit of joy in these little moments. You don't always get humor that translates well with games from this era, but Link's Awakening got quite a few chuckles out of me. My favorite was the guy in Mabe Village who tells you that he's going to get lost later, and lo and behold, you're adventuring and there he is, lost as he said he'd be. It's also likely the reason why there's so many references to other Nintendo stuff in this game. I mean, within a few screens on starting up, you see a damn Chain Chomp. Kirby's an enemy later in the game, and there's just straight up Goombas and Thwomps and Cheep Cheeps running around. And did you know, by the way, that Princess Peach's real name is apparently Christine? That was a shock to me, although this is just a gag. I think. Well, with all that said, I did enjoy my time with Link's Awakening. I don't know if I enjoy 2D Zelda as much as 3D Zelda, but this was still an entertaining adventure. The items were great, traveling through Koholint Island was fun, and the core gameplay is pretty sweet. Sure, it annoys and confuses me pretty often, especially in the latter half, but I'm willing to bet it's less bad design and more just me being a big dum-dum. As I said, I haven't played the Switch remake, but from what I understand, that's the best way to play this game now. Although with DX now available on Nintendo Switch Online, I'd argue that the original version holds up well enough to check out. Regardless, I'm definitely curious to look at more Zelda games in the future, and I'd love to hear your recommendations for games in the series you'd like me to play. Now, if you don't mind, I'm gonna play some more Tears of the Kingdom. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Give it a like and leave a comment if you feel so inclined. And as always, make sure to subscribe to see more.